Welcome to the Art of Parenting lesson 4 of our 6-week journey, gleaning insights and wisdom from Judaism for raising children. Today's lesson is titled Competence and Confidence. We are going to be talking about the importance of self-esteem and how to make sure our children grow up independent and competent and full of self-confidence to be able to tackle anything that they want to tackle. Okay, as usual, we will begin with a video teaser for today's lesson. Let me just make sure the sound and the video is sharing. Please turn your attention to the video screens.
I'm so devastated. I just found out that my 8-year-old daughter has been bullied for over a year by a girl in her class. We recently moved to a new neighborhood, and Nancy had to change schools. She was always such a happy, sociable child. She had so many friends. She was my social butterfly. The first few months after the move, I noticed that she was walking a little slumped over, and she told me she hated school. I thought she would get over it, that it would just take a little time for her to adjust. But it turns out that this girl has made her life a misery, calling her names, telling her that the girls in the class hate her, even pushing her around.
Listen up, everyone. Nancy Schmancy is trying to say something. Listen to her strange accent. You're weird.
I'm not sure what to do. On the one hand, I know I have to put a stop to it. And on the other, I need to rebuild my child's self-esteem. How would you react?
I think that this video really sets the tone for today's lesson. We're going to be talking about something that we know is crucial for our kids, and we also know it's crucial in 2024. Allow me to elaborate. I'm going to assume everybody's familiar with this image on the screen, but just in case, let me give a 20-second introduction. Abraham Harold Maslow was a Jewish-American psychologist whose dates are 1908 to 1970, and he's best known for creating this pyramid of needs, known as Maslow's pyramid of needs. It's a theory that psychological health is predicated on fulfilling innate human needs, such as priority, in a particular priority, such as we need to first have food and shelter and then move on to other things, etc. And it culminates in self-actualization. And one of my favorite things about this pyramid, and I guess really the thing that speaks to today's class, is that I want you to imagine if I was giving this parenting class, it certainly wouldn't be over Zoom, about 200 years ago, right? Instead of 2024, it would be sorry, I'm very tired. 1724 or 1824 or even 1924, most likely the conversation on the table right now wouldn't be, do our children have self-esteem, but do our children have food? Do they have shelter? Do they have clothing? We'd be here to support each other and to help each other, etc. That being said, I think when we live in an era where those are no longer struggles, thank God most of us in our community, and certainly everyone on the Zoom, if not, you'll let me know if that's not the case. We're here to support you. Most of us can provide the food and the clothing and the shelter and everything that our children need in that way. And not just that, but backpacks and maybe luxurious foods and vacations every once in a while, etc. And the thing that I think we have to realize is that we also have to adapt. Just because those have become easy for us to provide doesn't mean we shouldn't be pushing the envelope. So in an era in which we have relative success with the bottom levels of the pyramid, I think successful parenting requires us to climb the needs of the pyramid and address our children's higher needs, such as self-esteem. Self-esteem's virtues, I think, are very, very widely extolled. The detriments of low self-esteem have also been well documented. And I'd really like to dive right into the class, but let's do it a little bit of justice. So Susie, if I can ask you to start us off, we're on page 96, text 1. Hold on, let me just let someone in here. Yeah, when you're ready, text 1 on page 96. from Matthew McKay and Patrick Fanning's Self-Esteem. Go ahead.
Self-esteem is essential for psychological survival. It is an emotional sine qua non. Judging and rejecting yourself causes enormous pain. And in the same way that you would favor and protect a physical wound, you find yourself avoiding anything that might aggravate the pain of self-rejection in any way. You take fewer social, academic, or career risks. You make it more difficult for yourself to meet people, interview for a job, or push hard for something where you might not succeed. You limit your ability to open yourself with others, be the center of attention, hear criticism, ask for help, or solve problems. To avoid more judgments and self-rejection, you erect barriers of defense. Perhaps you blame or get angry or bury yourself in perfectionistic work, or you brag, or you make excuses. Sometimes you turn to alcohol or drugs.
Now let's just get one thing out of the way really quickly. This is not an issue only with children, right? This is an issue in adults as well. We're actually giving a course in the summer, little tiny plug for my upcoming course, which is, well, it's not the upcoming. I have 2 more courses before that, but then in the summer there's a course called How Happiness Thinks. And it's going to be the Hasidic approach to joy. Like Hasidus has a lot of insight into this. And lesson 1 is literally about this. It's about how to develop a healthy self-esteem while at the same time not becoming arrogant, because we all know that those two can be very close to each other, right? We all know people who have maybe a little bit too healthy of a self-esteem, right? So that's something we struggle with even as adults. And some people who don't have a healthy self-esteem, and we'll soon talk about this in terms of bullying, that grows with them into adults. And I think that's one of the reasons we have to be so conscious of this when it comes to children, is we're trying to bring up healthy children, right? So if we want to bring up healthy children, we have to make sure, we're trying to raise healthy adults. So if we're trying to raise healthy adults when it comes to self-esteem, we want them at the age of 25, if they are a boss, not to be a bully of a boss, right? And we want them to be able to survive in the workplace and be able to, if someone tells them something off, they should have the confidence and the competence to be able to say, I have an intrinsic self-worth. Then I think we have to include that in our parenting course to talk about what are we doing for our children in this regard as parents. Now, lest you think that the effects of this are limited to the financial success or relationship success, etc., it actually affects our religious relationship with God also to a very large degree. Let's start with text 2, and then I want to share a very interesting insight. Miriam, can you read for us, please? We're on page 97.
Sure. Just as we must believe in God, we must also believe in ourselves. We must believe that God cares about us, that we are not worthless laborers, that we possess divine souls, and that God takes pleasure and joy when we fulfill his desire.
There is a prayer. I think I've mentioned this in the past. I think 2 weeks ago we learned about it, which is supposed to be the first prayer that a Jew says upon awakening, and it's called Modeh Ani.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the most beautiful things about Modeh Ani is that we literally say, "Thank you, God, for creating me, for believing in me." We say, "Great is your trustworthiness." That God he places his trust in me, that he's giving me life again for a new day, to be able to do something in this new day. And if a person doesn't have that confidence, if a person doesn't believe in themselves, then it starts to mean, right? Because self-esteem at its most extreme, depression, etc., can lead to suicide. Why? Because I don't believe that I'm worth existing. I don't believe that my life is worth continuing in any way, right? When we put the religious spin on that, essentially what we're saying is that a healthy self-esteem means we appreciate, and that our children appreciate, that God has a purpose and a mission and a reason for them to be alive today. Modeh Ani is a reaffirmation of this every single morning. But here in this text, Rabbi Tzadok HaKohen is pointing out that we believe in God, we have to learn to believe in ourselves as an extension of believing in God. It goes together. So on that note, we're going to do a few exercises today that I'm not going to ask you to share with anybody. I'm not even going to ask you to reflect on it later. It's just a question that I think perhaps we don't ask often enough. If you don't want to do it now, you can do it with your spouse, and that's okay. But I don't know that we do this often enough as parents. On page 97, we have an exercise that asks you to rate your child's overall self-esteem. And if you have more than one child, yes, you should do this for each of the children. Do we think it's healthy and robust? Do you think it's average? Or do you think it's weak and needs improvement? And I think just the very act of doing this exercise will be helpful. I think it'll affect your parenting going forward, especially today's lesson, because we're going to learn some tips and tricks, etc. About this. So knowing where we stand is crucial. All right. That being said, let's move on. I want to take a few minutes to discuss a particular detrimental consequence of low self-esteem, and that is bullying. I guess we should start off by defining bullying, right? So we're going to read some texts that are going to define bullying, but I want to show you that it's a very, very delicate topic, and to recognize when something is bullying and when something is actually a symptom of something else is often very, very difficult to do. So take a look at page 98. All right. Let's get the chat up here. Hold on. I'll pull it up here. All right. So if you can type into the chat the answer to these three questions. Do you think this is a bullying behavior? Scenario number one, a 6-year-old is constantly grabbing toys from his 5-year-old sibling. Bullying or not bullying? Type in the chat. Okay, we already have a machloket. Good job, guys. 2 jobs, 2 Jews, 3 opinions. We have 2 for no, 2 for yes. Okay. All right. The second one, and I think you see right away where we need to go here. We need to start to define bullying, to appreciate what exactly is wrong with bullying. Second scenario. A 12-year-old is part of a clique that regularly humiliates the less popular kids in the class. Bullying or not bullying? Type your answers in the chat. Pretty unanimous. Yes, yes, yes. Bullying, regularly, yes. Well, it says regularly in the scenario, so we're assuming it's regularly. Okay. Scenario number 3, a 9-year-old, when upset, physically lashes out at her siblings. Bullying or not bullying? I gotta know. No. Pretty unanimous for no, not bullying. To fine-tune our definition of bullying, not bullying unless Sarah says so. Thank you, Zach. To fine-tune our definition of bullying, I think the U.S. government has provided a very good resource. We turned to the website Stop Bullying, which was set up by the United States, and we're going to ask Zach, or only if Sarah allows him to please read for us text 3. It's on page 98 in your book, text 3. Zach.
Bullying is unwanted, aggressive behavior among school-age children that involves a real or perceived power imbalance. The behavior is repeated or has the potential to be repeated over time. Both kids who are bullied and who bully others may have serious, lasting problems. In order to be considered bullying, the behavior must be aggressive and include 1, an imbalance of power. Kids who bully use their power, such as physical strength, access to embarrassing information, or popularity, to control or harm others. 2, repetition. Bullying behaviors happen more than once or have the potential to happen more than once.
Okay, so far we have 2 criteria. We're not done yet, right? But we have 2 criteria, which is number 1 has to be an imbalance of power. So there's a stronger child, a more popular child, etc., physically or emotionally stronger, or in some sort of higher place of power, and they are repetitively taking advantage and abusing another child. So given this criteria, let's go back to that 6-year-old who's constantly grabbing toys away from his 5-year-old sibling, right? Is he a bully? I would say maybe. We need, and that's why I think the crowd here was split. We need more information to answer that question. If he's taking the toys only when he wants them, right? Not bullying at all, right? He's not using his power to access embarrassing information or popularity to control or harm others. He's using his power. It's true. He is in an imbalance of power, right? And it might even be happening repetitively, but it's not happening just out of sadistic desire to control or harm others. It's actually happening out of in other words, if the child wasn't there, he wouldn't look for somebody else to bully. He's looking for the toy. He's not looking for the child. And as a result, we would say it's not bullying. Obviously, that takes a nuanced perspective, and perhaps it's a combination of both, etc. The 12-year-old, however, and I think we had a very, very clear consensus here, that's part of a clique that regularly humiliates less popular kids in the class, right? That sounds very much like bully-like behavior. And it doesn't even have to be physical violence, as we know, especially with girls, right? It could be primarily verbally. On the other hand, the 9-year-old I think we had a consensus about this as well, who when upset, and I think you guys all caught those words, when upset is lashing out physically. In each of these situations, there's something to be done to remedy the behavior. There's something we should be appreciating about our children, but over here it's not necessarily bullying. We shouldn't be worried about the child is a bully. We should be worried that the child maybe doesn't know how to self-regulate, right? Or something along those lines. Or handle their emotions, different nuanced approaches. It's so important to know exactly what bullying is and keep our eye out for it, because it has extremely devastating consequences. Let's go back to stopbullying.gov. One of the Shebbies, Matt or Beth, can we ask you to read for us, please? We're on page 99, text 4A.
Kids who are bullied can experience negative physical, school, and mental health issues. Kids who are bullied are more likely to experience depression and anxiety, increased feelings of sadness and loneliness, changes in sleep and eating patterns, and loss of interest in activities they used to enjoy. These issues may persist into adulthood. They may also experience health complaints and decreased academic achievement, GPA and standardized test scores, and school participation. They are more likely to miss, skip, or drop out of school.
Okay, I think this should come as no surprise to any of us that bullying has extreme consequences for the bullied, right? For the one that is bullied. A very small number of children that are being bullied are likely to retaliate through extremely violent measures. So it's certainly not a rule, right? But it does happen. In 12 of 15 school shooting cases in the 1990s, the shooter had a history of being bullied. So it could lead to that as well. I think that's why it's not on the website as an actual effect, but in a small number of cases that could be the case. But I want to flip the script now, right? Because I think it's also very important to talk about the bully. The bully is also, right, because I think all of us are equally worried about our children being bullied and about our children becoming the bully, because both of them can have very negative effects on the child. Svetlana, if we can ask you to read, please, for us, text 4B on page 100.
Kids who bully others can also engage in violent and other risky behaviors into adulthood. Kids who bully are more likely to abuse alcohol and other drugs in adolescence and as adults, get into fights, vandalize property, and drop out of school, engage in early sexual activity, have criminal convictions and traffic citations as adults, and be abusive toward their romantic partners, spouses, or children as adults.
So there are a lot of detriments. We see them on the screen here summarizing to the children who are bullied. And then there are lots of detriments, lots of downsides to a child who is a bully. It's not just a socially bad thing to be a bully or the bullied. It can actually have effects on lots of other parts of their lives. And I think that just as important as it is to make sure that our children are not exhibiting signs of being bullied, we also have to make sure to be keeping it right. By the way, this can be at home or at school, right? I think we're all familiar with this. I think it's also important that we make sure that our children are not acting like bullies to other children. Okay, so we now know that bullying is, we know what it is. We know that it's very, very ugly in terms of its consequences, both for the perpetrator and for the victim, and the long-term consequences that there are well into adulthood, etc. And by the way, I think we can all think of people in our lives that we know of that are adults, nice, healthy, functioning adults, but one of the things they really struggle with is bullying, whether it's a boss at work, and they've just never learned whether it's their parents' fault, whether it's their fault, whether it's just a lack of, I don't know, whatever, the home that they grew up in, etc. But that they are bullies or bullied in adult scenarios, in family dynamics, or in work dynamics, coworkers, etc. So the question on the table now for us is, what causes a child to bully others? What is the underlying factor that causes a child to bully others? And then on the flip side, what would make a child more attractive as a target for bullies? We're trying to learn to appreciate what those signs are, and obviously, as always, to try and give our children the tools that they need to be able to avoid that as they go through their childhood. And here is where self-esteem becomes extremely, extremely relevant. Stopbullying.gov lists low self-esteem among the important risk factors for becoming a perpetrator or a victim of bullying. And this, I think, is probably the most ironic thing about bullying, is that usually both the bully and the bullied are suffering from a similar type of condition. And often that is a low self-esteem. Now, I want to just make a disclaimer. Obviously, not all instances of a bully is that because of self-esteem. Not all instances of a child being bullied is that because of low self-esteem. But it is, as a general rule, it is often the case that these things are part of it. So how should we understand the correlation between self-esteem and the high risk factor that contains for bullying? I think this text 5 will give us some insight. Here we're going to talk more about the bully than the bullied, but we'll get back to that in a moment. We're over here. Sarah, can you read for us, please? We're on page 101, text 5.
So I'm in the car. I'm gonna have
no worries.
Zach. I'll be home soon, but Zach's gonna take over for me
All
if
right,
he can
sounds
read the
good.
part. Okay.
Go ahead, Zach. You were just called out. Text 5. Text 5.
Okay. Text 5. The bully's ego is artifice. His arrogance is a hollow confidence. This ego for him is a fragile thing, driven by fear and narcissism, not by power, nor by the power he wishes so desperately to possess. He feeds on our fear, but his hunger is driven solely by his own. The key for the bullied is to recognize that the bully's bullying is not about us, it's about him and his weakness. It's about his sense of being threatened and his horror at being found out as an imposter or a poser. He is afraid, quite afraid, and all the time.
I think this is probably the most important thing that we're looking to make sure for our children. The bully chooses targets based on sensing low esteem in someone. But the reason he does that, right? So he's looking for someone who's timid, who's apprehensive, who's unconfident, etc. But the reason he does that is because he feels the need to esteem himself. As a result, he becomes aggressive, dismissive, contemptuous of other people, and he feels that he can take their esteem from them and take it for himself. So this is why those who lack self-worth find themselves on one of the two extremes. I think I don't want to say this as advice for if your child is struggling with bullying right now, but let's just talk about this for just a moment. Often we say that a good thing for a bully is if you're not reacting to it, right? If you don't let it affect you. Now, what we're really trying to tell the child is that actually the issue on the table is the fact that it bothers you so much. Okay, this is why I'm not sharing this now as advice for if your child is being bullied now. I'm sharing this if we're talking about this as a theoretical now to give our children the tools so that they shouldn't be bullied. Let me explain what I mean. I don't know that in a case of bullying, the right thing where a child is being bullied, the right thing right now is to ignore it. If it's actually bothering the child, then we need to actually deal with that. But let's talk about 3 years before that. Why is it bothering the child so much that they are being bullied? Right? How does bullying start? It starts the first time that someone takes advantage of someone else, that someone abuses someone else in a public setting, and what they see is fear. What they see is timidness. What they see is you are intimidated by my act that I just did, and then they become addicted to that. The bully becomes addicted to that. The real issue at hand here, and we're going to get to this, this is really where I want to get to with today's lesson. The real issue at hand here is that there's clearly an issue with the sense of self-worth that the child who is being bullied has. There's a low self-esteem there that the child feels, oh, the bully is telling me Nancy Schmancy has a bad accent. I probably have a funny accent, right? Accents are not inherently funny. Why does the child feel that way? Why are the words of the bully to the child, why are they affecting them so strongly? The reason is because of that low self-esteem. So if we as parents want to give our children the tools, if we want to equip our children so that they don't experience this as they go into the world, then one of the things we're going to have to take a strong and hard look at is what are we doing to make sure that our children know that they are inherently valuable, so that when a bully comes and tells them you're not valuable and tries to take away their esteem, that doesn't intimidate them. And this brings to mind the following story, which is text 6 on page 102. Matt, if you can read, please. I'm assuming Matt is there together with Beth. I don't know.
Yes, I am.
There you go.
All right. As a small child, Reb Zalman Aharon, the older brother of Rebbe Shalom Dovber of Lubavitch, often complained that he was noticeably shorter than his younger brother. One day, the Raza sneaked up behind his brother and pushed him lightly into a small ditch. As the Rashab stood up in surprise, the Raza seized the moment and pointed out that now he was taller. Rabbi Shmuel of Lubavitch, the father of the two boys, observed the entire episode. The Rebbe asked for a chair, ordered the Raza to stand in it, and asked him, "Tell me, who's taller now?" The Raza answered excitedly that yet again he was taller. "Aha," said Rabbi Shmuel, "there you are. To be bigger than your friend, there is no need to pull him down. Simply elevate yourself."
I think this story has such a powerful lesson. I've already told this story to my children, even as young as they are, because it starts with the small things that they're doing. Often children, in order to win a basketball game, they feel the need to push the other kid out of the way. In order to win a race, they feel the need to push the other kid out of the way. And these are small exhibitions of something that we all struggle with, because there is a certain sense of selfishness where we want to win. We all have an animal soul and a selfish soul, and we want to win. But we have to teach our children that if we want to be good at something, if we want to be competent at something, right, what's required of us is to become more competent than others, not to push others down. We never make ourselves greater by making someone else smaller. What happens to a bully is that they become addicted to making other people smaller. They started when they were really young. The first time they had it, they felt that rush. I'm greater than him because I pushed him down. I'm greater than her because I made fun of her. And then that becomes a pattern, a vicious cycle, whereby the only way that they can feel greater than someone else is when they are pushing the other one down. I see there are some comments in the chat. I'm going to get to them soon. Okay. So what are these tools? What do we think are the important things to build up in a child from when they're very young? And as they go into their teenage years, it becomes even more important. What are the important things to equip our children with, to make sure that they're not going to fall into an issue of bullying, and that they will have a healthy self-esteem? I would say that if I were to ask 10 of you to define self-esteem for me, and to tell me how to go about it, I have a feeling we would get close to 10 answers. And there's been a lot of books written on this topic and lots of academic ink that's been spilled on it. What seems so familiar, I think, when we just talk about it in general sweeping terms, all of a sudden becomes very hard to define when we're trying to actually, boil it down to one specific definition. But that's okay, because we don't need to learn about self-esteem in a comprehensive psychological sense. We don't need to have a Webster's definition. We just need to talk about the important components that are going to lead to us being able to build self-esteem in our children in terms of parenting techniques. And in this lesson, we're going to talk about two primary elements of our children's self-esteem. Okay, and these are elements that you will be able to shape, that you will be able to make a difference within your actions, with actionable things that by the end of today's lesson you'll be able to do. So let's dive into it, shall we? Number one is personal competence. Every child, as they grow up, should feel able to accomplish and succeed the many tasks that they are going to be presented with throughout life. And obviously, at each age, there are different expectations, if you will, based on when they're much younger, based on motor skills, and as they get older, based on academic skills, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But I would say the first thing is personal competence. And the second thing is an intrinsic sense of self-worth. Now, what do we mean by intrinsic? What we mean by intrinsic means it should not be dependent on anything else. All right? I'm sure we're all familiar with people that are in their 50s, and yet somehow they still define their self-worth based on X, Y, or Z. Very common is their money or their status in a particular club or whatever it is, right? And what happens, or with their house or with their car, etc. And this often leads, by the way, back to the happiness course, which we're going to be giving in the summer. I think one of the main things we're going to talk about then is the importance of having a self, even as an adult, to have an intrinsic sense of self-worth. Why? Because if our self-worth is dependent on something, take away the thing, and our self-worth is gone. Now we're depressed for a year, right? Now we're having suicidal thoughts, etc. Why? Because all of my self-worth was based on I'm a good parent. So if I'm not a good parent, boom, now I'm in a slump. All my self-worth was based on I have a lot of money and I have status, that I've been successful in my business. So now if I have a couple bad years financially, boom, I'm in a slump, and that can lead to lead me to a terrible place. But if we have an intrinsic sense of self-worth, then all of that goes away. And I think if we're going to give our children anything, these two things, that our children should know that they are competent, that they can do anything if they put their mind to it, that they are capable, and that our children should know that even if that thing that they're competent at is not here right now, they're still valuable. I think these two things are extremely important. Why do we want our children to have both of these feelings? I think we could probably fill this box with 1.5 million things. It's on page 103 for those that are not following. It's a learning exercise which is asking you to describe the advantages and disadvantages of these children's self-concept, right? So a child who feels intrinsically worthy, right, and feels competent, right, or a child who feels competent but feels intrinsically unworthy. I think both of them will be motivated. So I'm talking about A and C. That's where I am right now. If they're in A and C, they'll be motivated to work and accomplish, and they'll be willing to take risks. They won't be afraid, for example, to interview for a job, or to go on a date, or to stand up to somebody who's doing something evil. In general, they'll be willing, possibly even eager, to take on challenges and explore new areas and ways to improve their life circumstances. But on the other hand, when you talk about somebody who is incompetent or feels intrinsically unworthy, then they're going to sit back and be passive. They're going to think to themselves, why try? I'm not going to succeed anyways. And sadly, these feelings of incompetence almost always have no basis in reality. One of my favorite authors coming up here, once again, Rabbi Dr. Abraham J. Twersky. Where are we holding here? Let's go with Susie. Page 104. Text 7. Don't forget to unmute yourself.
As I studied the negative self-image problem, I found that the most profound feelings of low self-esteem paradoxically occur most often in those who are in reality the most gifted and competent. It appears that the person who develops a negative self-image sees himself as if he were looking through a trick lens, which distorts the perception in such a manner that the person sees himself as the opposite of what he actually is.
You know, we definitely don't want, we definitely want our children to feel competent. We don't want them to feel incompetent. But at the same time, I think we also have to recognize that when they feel incompetent, despite the fact that it's factually not so, often that's because they're placing too much value, too much emphasis on the competence. What do I mean by that? We want our children to love and value themselves for what they can do. Sure, you're talented, you're a good artist, you're good at this sport, and therefore I'm very proud of you. It's all of that. We do want to say that. It's not a terrible thing to tell a child, you're good because you can do those things. But we also want them to be able to respect themselves for who they are. That's not my entire value. That's not what I bring to, that's not the only thing I bring to the table. What I bring to the table is the fact that I'm a human being, and the fact that I am unique and I am me. And even if those things are taken away from me, there are other things that I'm capable of, or I will become capable at other things, etc. So I think we've defined the two things that we are going to really want to drive home in today's lesson, which is A, competence, and B, an intrinsic sense of self-worth. And the first thing we want to talk about is how to do that, right? What parenting techniques, we're on page 104, what parenting techniques help our children feel more competent? What parenting techniques help our children feel intrinsically valuable? And maybe what are things, maybe, should I whisper it? What are things that we could be doing that might negatively harm a child's self-esteem, right? Maybe there are things that we're doing that are that way. I think, you know, why don't we start with a little discussion about that? Does anybody want to? Maybe I'm asking for trouble here. Anybody want to type something in the chat or unmute themselves? What do you think are things we can do to help our children feel more competent, to help our children feel more intrinsically secure in themselves, in their sense of self, and maybe what are things that we're doing that are negatively affecting those things. Anybody want to jump in here? Not all at once.
Oh, this is a big deal between my two kids because they have very different abilities.
Ooh, we're going to talk about that shortly. Okay, but let me let you finish. Go ahead.
Oh, so getting one son to pay attention takes a lot more work than it is for the other one.
Right.
And that kid can tell that.
Right. So it's important, in other words, that the competence level is not some sort of abstract barometer. It has to be per child. We're going to talk about that momentarily. Thank you.
That's what I mean to say.
Yes, we're gonna talk about that momentarily. So hold that thought, Susie. So you want to share something?
I mean, so giving them the opportunity to learn things on their own and not interceding. I have a 3-year-old, so he, likes to do lots of things on his own. They take a long time, but it's better for him to learn how to do that, to be
we're
competent.
tempted to always sweep in and just do it in 10 seconds as opposed to the 5 minutes it's going to take him to do it 100%. That's a good thing. I like that.
Yeah.
Okay.
But then growing up, I remember like I would have parental figures tell me I was so good at all of these things, and it felt like I know that they were trying to encourage me, but it actually just felt fake and superficial.
you know
and I
what?
kind of distrusted that.
Okay. Does somebody else want to share? Because I really want to take what Susie's saying and run with that. Does somebody else want to share something?
I actually, if you'd allow me, absolutely. I was one of the kids that was in the gifted program. And then when I got depression and had to take the kind of medications that would take away, that made intelligence things very hard, it was extremely hard. I mean, that stuff was no longer true until I was off that medication. So
hold on a second.
Should I keep going or do you want to keep going?
No, hold on a second. I'll explain why. I think you're going in a different direction. You're
Sorry.
talking about No, that's okay. It's okay. They're both very valuable points here. First of all, Miriam, what you're talking about is something we were just talking about, which is that perhaps your sense of competence was also connected to your sense of self-worth. And when some of that competence was taken away, in this case by medication, but it could happen from all sorts of things, right? A child could be a great singer and have a great voice, but then as they mature and that, like their voice is maybe not the most sweet and beautiful as it was when they were a child, that gets taken, and all of a sudden their whole sense of self-worth gets shattered. So that's a very important point that, and we're going to talk about that as we move along, that the competence should not be connected to self-worth. They can both be stressed, but they don't have to be linked. Okay, hold on, but I wanted to run with what Susie was saying. Susie mentioned that when she was younger, and I think this is something we can all relate to, whether it's from our parents or the way we parent our children, or when we see other parents doing this, we sometimes get this impression. We say, hold on a second, you're saying that, but you're not showing it. Okay, and I think this is a very, very important point. It's important for us to give our children a feeling of competence. We have to give them responsibilities and leadership positions, etc. But perhaps sometimes we constantly tell our children, let's just take something simple, right? Setting the table. You're so good at setting the table. I want you to set the table. You're so good at setting the table. You're setting the table, etc. Then they set the table, and you're standing right behind them, fixing the cutlery and fixing the cups, etc. We spoke about this. We spoke about this in lesson 1 when we spoke about modeling. Then it was in a slightly different direction. We spoke about the fact that we should do things, or that our children should see that that's a good value. But here we're saying our actions actually speak louder than our words. Children listen to you, but even more than they listen to you, they watch you to see if you actually believe what you're telling them. So in other words, it's not so much about the message that we verbalize to our children, and we should say that every once in a while, make sure they know they're good at something, etc. But it's also the way we treat them. We don't only tell our children, I love you no matter what, right? I'm jumping now to the intrinsic worth. We don't just tell them I love you no matter what, but we act that way. When they do something to upset us, we make sure to show them that we love them, but we're upset about this action. In all the different ways that it is, the action, the way we act towards them is equally as important, if not more important, than the words we say. In extreme moments, our children will see our unconditional love for them, right? So so when we're good Jewish parents and they're going out and they don't have a coat on, and we say put on a coat, then they see our love. So just like when it comes to love, we're not satisfied by just telling our children, I love you no matter what, I love you, I love you, I love you, I love you so unconditionally, etc. We also feel need to show it. Not just we feel need to show it, we show it naturally. I think when it comes to competence, often we're guilty of this dual standard. We tell our children things like the sky is the limit, you can be anything you want to be, you really can do it, etc. Right? But then with our actions, we show that maybe we don't believe in our children so much. It's sad because we're missing the opportunity to treat our children as capable beings, which is infinitely more valuable to them when we show that to them. Now, I think Susie touched on this on a very light side, even though obviously it's still very important, that when we tell our children something but we act a different way, they pick up that it's not true. But I think there's something even deeper at play here, which is when we show, even subconsciously, we show our children that we don't believe in them, they start to adopt that as their own self-concept. Let's read this letter of the Rebbe, which I think is going to start to talk about what we can do to not only speak words and say to our children, you're very capable, but also act on it. Svetlana, if you can read for us, please. This is a letter of the Rebbe. By the way, when letters of the Rebbe are written, this is text 8, it's on page 105. When letters of the Rebbe are written, the way we have them, they're usually censored, and we don't even know who they were sent to, etc. We certainly don't know what was going on in the letter that was written to the Rebbe, because that's obviously of a very personal nature. But I think we can start to get a picture here. Go ahead, Svetlana.
Okie doke. Text 8. You surely know that nowadays such problems with children are very common. Usually, the final decision as to how to deal with children who have such problems lies with the administration of the school after discussing the situation with the parents and being advised of the way the child is handled at home. It is also well to bear in mind that a significant number of such problems are usually straightened out in the course of time. What surprises me is that there is a factor in the situation which is rarely, if ever, used. This is to give a problem child a role of leadership within the group of young children, though some school activity and like. This usually goes a long way to encourage the child's self-confidence, as well as making the child more sociable, etc. I trust that this method could be used also in your situation, of course, with the approval and under the supervision of the school administration.
So maybe one option of who the Rebbe was writing this letter to would be a child who lacked social skills, suffers from low self-esteem, was antisocial, etc. And the Rebbe is suggesting that maybe instead of just telling the child, you're worth it, you are capable, you are a good child, maybe we can actually show them that by giving them a position of some sort of responsibility or some sort of leadership. The reason this is great advice is because once we realize that a crucial step to self-esteem, right? So you have a child who's struggling with self-esteem. Once we realize that one of the crucial steps that is feeling competent, right? And then we recognize that children base their self-concept based on what parents and educators and those in influence in their lives are showing them, right? And specifically what they're showing them through action, not through verbalization. So now what we can do is we can accomplish all three of those, right? In other words, give the child the self-esteem through helping them feel competent by doing an action that shows our belief in them. And in this instance, the Rebbe is advising some sort of personal responsibility. What happens then? So the child does this thing, right? Then they're successful at it. Once they're successful at it, that boosts their self-esteem, encouraging them to do that action or other actions that they might feel they could be capable of even more, starting the opposite of a vicious cycle, which I once heard somebody call a delicious cycle, right? Where it starts to build its way up, one thing leading it to the next. Self-esteem, boosting into trying something out, boosting into being successful at it, leading into boosting self-esteem once again. This idea of granting children responsibilities was very, very dear to the Rebbe. We'll soon talk about how it wasn't just with children, it was with adults as well. But let's see text 9. Miriam, if you can read for us again, please. Page 106. This is another. I'm sorry. I don't think this is a letter. Oh, yes, it is. This is a letter of the Rebbe again. Text 9 when you're ready, Miriam.
It is very appropriate and worthwhile for school principals and teachers to recommend and encourage the students, boys and girls, including and especially those who have not yet reached the age of bar or bat mitzvah, to increase their charitable activities. Namely, the students of each school or each class should establish a free loan fund, and from time to time, each student should contribute his or her own money to this fund. In order to instill in the students' hearts the importance of personal charitable involvement and volunteer work, in addition to monetary generosity, it is most proper that these free loan funds be directed by the boys and girls themselves, with the students of the school or the class choosing from among themselves a director, a treasurer, etc. The fact that this fund is being administered by the students' representatives will cause them to have a stronger feeling of responsibility and personal commitment to the cause, which will, in turn, increase their energy and enthusiasm as well. It would be best to alternate from time to time, by way of student vote, the directorship of the free loan fund, as well as its various management positions, director, treasurer, bookkeeper, etc., in order to enable all the students, at least a majority, to be not just donors of money, but also donors of their time and energy.
The Rebbe is suggesting that these children set up a free loan society, right? There should be a treasurer, and there should be a CEO, and a vice chairman, and a vice chair, and all the different positions that, and everybody should be given a position of leadership. Why? Not so much because the free loan society itself is needed. There's probably a good chance that whatever service this, in this case, it's a free loan society, but whatever chesed it is, project that they're involved with, there's a good chance that the parents can do it even more, can be involved, can spearhead it better and get it done faster and more competently. But what the real thing the Rebbe is looking to gain here is to give each of the children that are involved in this project a sense of self competence, being aware that they can actually do this. And with this, I want to go back to that letter of the Rebbe, which we read earlier, text 8, and suggest that maybe, just maybe, it wasn't the child who was struggling with self-esteem. Maybe it wasn't the child who was struggling with their social skills at all. Maybe the real issue that was underlying was it was a child who was troubled, dealing with other issues in their lives. And what the Rebbe was saying was that perhaps, because then the response becomes even more fascinating, because that would mean that the Rebbe is penetrating the heart of the child's problem. You're coming to me and you're asking me about general trouble acting out, the problem child, as the Rebbe called it in the letter, right? Bouts of misbehavior, right? And I'm telling you, these might be symptoms of a deeper issue at hand here. What's the deeper problem? That it's common for children with low self-esteem to be the instigator. Remember how we said low self-esteem is often the preemptive or the preceding factor to bullying, right? So instead of merely addressing the child's misbehavior, the Rebbe is saying, like a doctor, let's not treat the symptoms, let's figure out what's at the crux of the problem. And as a result, giving them a sense of responsibility can now heal that self-esteem issue, which will then heal the bullying in and of itself, or the problem, or the acting out, or whatever it is in and of itself. As I mentioned earlier, this was something that the Rebbe believed in, not just for children, but even for adults. Probably the most common statement you hear from people about when they went by the Rebbe, when they spoke to the Rebbe, is that the Rebbe believed in them more than they believed in themselves. Isn't that interesting? They would come by the Rebbe, and the Rebbe would say something to them, and they would think, whoa, this is so out of my league. But then the Rebbe would say it to them, and when the Rebbe said this, the Rebbe meant it, and they would say, you know what, let me give it a try. The Rebbe believes me, let me try it. And then it would lead to their self-esteem being boosted even more than you know, had the Rebbe told them, don't worry, you're okay, etc. The Rebbe believed them, put them in positions of leadership. Please turn your attention to the video screens. This is former chief rabbi of the United Kingdom, Rabbi Dr. Lord Jonathan Sachs of blessed memory. He passed away, was it during COVID or right after COVID? He's talking about his relationship with the Rebbe. And I think there's two things he says that are very telling, which I highlighted on the side. Please turn your attention to the video screens.
What I saw in the Lubavitcher Rebbe was this, that other Jewish leaders that I've met created followers. The Lubavitcher Rebbe created leaders. I first met him when I was a 20-year-old undergraduate student at Cambridge University. And our first encounter, when I came to him with a lot of questions, was one that he turned around. He started asking me questions, challenging me, even at the age of 20, to be a leader of Jewish life. So what I found remarkable about him was the extent to which he could find in each individual the unique contribution that that individual could make to the totality of the Jewish people. That was a very rare skill. It was he who really encouraged me, or even ordered me, to become a rabbi. And one of the last requests I was able to make to him in his lifetime was whether I should undertake the chief rabbinate. And he answered in a way that was absolutely typical of him. He didn't say a word. He merely made a little mark on the letter that I had sent him. And the letter contained the question, should I take on this job? And he merely used the typographical symbol that reversed the words and said, I should. So he always communicated in a very brief way, but in a way that made you feel confident that he'd reached to the very heart of who you are, or at least who you might become.
There are so many instances of people who were in positions where they were struggling with something, and the Rebbe's advice to them was that they should become a leader in a particular aspect. And they would say, "Oh, I don't feel I don't feel out of confidence. I don't feel worthy enough for that position." The Rebbe would say, "Don't worry. Take on that position, and that position will force you to do that." I mean, the Rebbe was probably the greatest leader of leaders that the Jewish world has ever seen, right? The Rebbe established this Chabad Shluchim network that today has over 5,000 Shluchim. And trust me, not every one of the Shluchim is a perfect human being. In fact, I would venture to say none of them is a perfect human being. But to the Rebbe, besides the fact that he encouraged, if you know something, teach something, it was also, you know what? When you help someone else, this can actually impact you and help you. And I'm reminded of the statement, I believe it comes from the Zohar, which says that when someone gives tzedakah, isn't this interesting? When someone gives tzedakah to someone else, what is happening on a spiritual level? And this extends, by the way, to obviously financial tzedakah, but also to psychological tzedakah and helping someone else, the chesed, and being there for someone else, etc. His mind and his heart become refined 1,000-fold. Now it's interesting because it's obviously not something we're doing for ourselves. We're doing something for someone. You're engaged in doing something for someone else. But the moment that you step into a position where you're actually empowered to do something for someone else, it automatically, and this shouldn't be the reason we're doing it, but it automatically, as a side effect, affects us, that we feel more confident, we feel more self actualized, and more a sense of self-worth. And I think that if we're looking for our children to have that intrinsic sense of self-worth and to have that feeling of self-competence, then one of the things we're looking for is that they should be in a position of responsibility, that they should be in a position of leadership, even if you actually think they're not capable of it. Jump out of it, believe in them. Trust me, they'll rise to the challenge, and you'll watch it and you'll be surprised. Just make sure not to show that surprise, because then they'll pick up on that. Okay, where were we here? Yeah. Having said all this, I think an important element to teaching children to feel to feel competent is educating each child according to his or her unique nature. And this speaks to what Miriam was talking about earlier. She was talking about her two children and how they each have their own abilities. It's very important that the barometer of competence is not some sort of abstract 100% on a test. You know what I mean? And if you get a 98, then that's pretty good. And if you get a 78, that's not good. It has to be based on the child themselves and what that child's competence level is about, and where their nature shines. Let's start with text 10a, and then we'll dive right into text 10b. Dr. Afshin, are you with us? Can you read for us?
I am with you, but I don't have access to those texts, okay?
You don't have the book. That's okay. All right. So Susie, we're back with you. Text 10a on page 107. So this is first a quote from Proverbs, Mishlei.
Educate a child according to his way. Even when he grows old, he will not turn away. And then
Um,
text B.
one second. And
Okay.
this is such an important point that we have to educate each child according to their way. Before you say text 10b, even though I said we're going to dive right into it, let me just share one story that I think will emphasize this point. Each child has their unique talents, strengths, and shortcomings. And those strengths and shortcomings might even be things that they were born with. That's okay. There are things that they're better at, and there are things that they're worse at. I'm not just talking about physical strengths and shortcomings, like they're taller or they're shorter. I'm talking also, psychologically and their personality, etc. And I think what we're looking to drive home to our children is the idea of this story. It's one of my favorite stories because it involves a chassid whose name was Zusha. And Rabbi Zusha of Anipoli was his name. And he was known for saying, he would say like this, he would say, I'm not worried that after I die, I will come up to heaven and they will ask me, why weren't you Moses? I have the perfect ready answer. I wasn't created to be Moses. I wasn't supposed to be Moses, so I wasn't Moses. But he would always say, I am deathly afraid. I tremble when I think of coming up above after 120 years on this earth, and they would look at me and they would say, why weren't you Zusha? In other words, when we come up to heaven, they're going to judge us not based on some abstract reality of, Moses and how close or how far are you from being Moses. It's going to be how close and how far were you from being Zusha, from being Zushi. Zushi Rifkin, when he comes up, will have to judge based on my potential and my abilities and my capabilities, how far and how close was I to fulfilling that potential. This is the point that the Vilna Gaon makes in text 10b, and he's going to be talking, by the way, using language that we're going to be using in the Seder, right? So everybody remember the Seder is coming up in 3 weeks, and in the Haggadah, you might not remember, it's been 12 and a half months ago already, and that's the Jewish calendar for those that are not following, which has 13 months this year. I'm not that tired. I didn't think there were 13 months in a regular year, but we're in a leap year this year. And 12 and a half months ago, we read in the Haggadah, and we're going to do so again shortly. And one of the paragraphs in the Haggadah talks about the 4 sons. The 4 sons. And did you know that the entire Haggadah, even the word Haggadah, where does the word Haggadah come from? The word Haggadah means to tell, and it comes from a verse in the Torah, which commands us to tell the story of the Exodus. V'higadata levincha. There will come a time, says the Torah, says God to the Jewish people, that your children will not know. And they'll ask you, what is all this that we're doing, this whole Seder? And he got it to Levincha, and you will tell it over to your children. So the whole Seder night is structured as education. It's supposed to be all about chinuch, educating our children. How do we bring up our children? One of the first paragraphs that we read, even before we dive into the whole story and why it should have impact on us, etc., one of the first paragraphs that we read is, Kineged arba'a banim dibra Torah. It's a quote from the Talmud, which says that if you take a look at the verse in the Torah, when it said, you'll notice that it's talking in 4 different types of languages as if it's talking to 4 different characters, right? And those are, of course, the 4 sons, the Chacham, the Rasha, the Tam, and the Shene de Elisha, right? The wise son, the wicked son, the simpleton, and the one who doesn't even know how to ask, right? And take a look at what the Vilna Gaon in text 10b shares with us. Susie, you were reading, right? I know I interrupted you there for a long time.
Yes.
Page 108.
We cannot escape our innate personality, but we can choose how to channel it. We can utilize our inborn nature for positive, negative, or neutral causes. Thus, the Talmud says that a person born with a violent nature who is inclined to spill blood can turn out to be a moil, circumciser, a shochet, ritual slaughterer, or a murderer. This illustrates how the same nature can be utilized for a holy objective, circumcision, a neutral objective, slaughtering animals, or an evil end, murder. Hence, the verse instructs us to educate a child according to his way, in a manner that is consistent with the child's nature. For then, even when he grows old, he will not turn away. If, however, we attempt to compel a child to act in a manner that is inconsistent with his or her nature, the child may listen to us now in deference to our authority. But afterwards, when the child matures and sheds the yoke of our authority, he or she will turn away from the education we provided, for it tried to accomplish the impossible, the alteration of a person's innate nature.
We cannot expect a child who doesn't speak English to gain anything from a class that's delivered in English. We certainly cannot expect that child to become an English teacher, right? Similarly, we can't expect a child who doesn't naturally connect to a certain style, to a certain path, to a certain way to gain from having that path forced upon them. In text 11, Rabbi Adin Even Yisrael Steinsaltz, who also just recently passed, I think also around the same period, in the past 2-3 years, we've lost some of the greats. Sarah, if we can ask you to read, please, on text 11 on page 109.
Yeah. Parenting is like tending a garden. To properly care for it, you first have to know what you have in it. Do you have potatoes? Do you have roses? Do you have thorns? Then you have to take care and nurture each organism according to its unique needs.
Similarly, every child has to be judged based on their unique character, strengths, and virtues. And here we get our first intensive homework of the entire course. I know each week we've been leaving you with an exercise at the end of the lesson. Here, this is a pretty intensive one. We're not going to do this inside the class. I don't even encourage anybody to do this inside the class. But when you get a chance with your spouse, I want you to take a look at page 110, 111, and 112 in your book, and 113 and 114. Right? How far does it go? Those 3-4 pages. There are 24 character traits on those pages, okay? And there are things that go under the category of wisdom and knowledge. There are things that go under the category of courage, things go under the category of humanity. This is the science of what they call positive psychology. And it teaches us the importance of identifying and regularly using a person's signature strengths. Remember, we said we're looking to build competence and intrinsic self-worth. So far, we've been talking about competence. We're going to get to intrinsic self-worth in just a moment. But so far, we've been talking about self-competence. The best way to do this, and this comes from positive psychologists Chris Peterson and Martin Seligman. There's a book they have that's called Character, Strengths, and Virtues. And it identifies 24 different types of character traits, right? Some in the area of wisdom and knowledge, some in the area of courage, some in the area of humanity, justice, let's keep going, temperance, transcendence. And there are lots of different options. And every single one of us have areas along this chart that we excel in by nature. We're not even talking here by nurture. By nature, of course, we can all grow in things that we're bad about, right? But we're talking about identifying things that we're already good at and encouraging our children to keep going in that path so as to build their sense of competence and belief in themselves, their self-esteem. So they divide these 24 strengths into 6 broad categories, the ones we just saw on the screen. And I think it behooves every single one of us to consider our children in the context of these traits. With what goal? Right? So on page 110, you can see this. The exercise is as follows. You do this with your spouse and you get a chance. Analyze the 24 character traits that are listed below and try to identify some of, at least, circle circle, put your child's name next to it. If you have more than one child, do it for each child. Their signature strengths, right? Now, again, this is an exercise that even if you don't do anything with it, obviously, the goal is to try to find opportunities to show your child that they're good at that and to get them to shine in that way. Like that, they grow in their self-esteem. But even if you don't do that consciously, trust me, even just doing the exercise and recognizing this about your child will go a long way towards allowing you to, over time, allow that part of them to shine and in a natural way, letting their self-competence grow and their self-esteem be strengthened. Okay, so we'll I'll leave you with that exercise for after the lesson. I think you all have the textbook. By the way, if anybody doesn't have their textbook yet, I have I think 5 of them left in my office. Some of you don't have textbooks. I think I ordered for the students. Yeah, but some of you also I think only took one when it was a couple. I have extra textbooks. If anybody doesn't have one, please let me know. I'll be happy to give you one. It's part of your registration for this course. Okay, so that is about competence, which leads to self-esteem. But what about the other element of self-esteem? Remember, we said that we don't want our children only to be defining their sense of self-worth based on the things that they're competent at. They should have an intrinsic sense of self-worth, right? And even though this one's gonna be briefer, we only have 15 minutes left of the class, but I think it's very, very important. For this, we're going to turn to the story of Abraham. I think most of us are familiar with the story, at least on a broad stroke level. We read it every single morning as part of our prayers. On Yom Kippur, we read it even in the shul, right? That when Isaac, Yitzchak, was 37 years old, God commands him to take Abraham, what's known as the Akedat Yitzchak, commands him to take Abraham, to take Isaac, commands Abraham to take Isaac and bring him up to Mount Moriah and bring his son as a sacrifice on the top of the mountain. And there's this interesting moment, and Svetlana, if we can ask you to read it for us, please. In text 12a, it's a verse from Genesis, from where the story is being told. So this is the exact text. Go ahead, Svetlana.
Okay, starting with 12a.
Yes.
He said to Abraham, please take your son, your only one whom you love, Isaac, and go to the land of Moriah.
So the Talmud, which has, by the way, an aversion to any extra words in the Torah, says, hold on a second, there's a lot of extra words here. God could have simply said, take Yitzchak. So the Talmud says, right, so what's all the words here for? The Talmud explains that there was some back and forth between the Almighty and his servant Abraham, back and forth. And what's the in-between of this conversation? So Svetlana, please read for us text 12b.
Take your son, God instructed. I have 2 sons, Abraham responded. Your only one. Isaac is his mother's only child, and Ishmael is his mother's only child. The one whom you love. I love them both. Take Isaac.
This is not just a conversation. It's not a semantics. This isn't Abraham playing shtick, if you will. Abraham truly loved and viewed his children equally. Despite their vast differences, Yitzchak was far superior spiritually speaking than Ishmael. But Abraham knew that each of them has their way in which they shine. And to Abraham, each child was a whole world in and of himself. As he puts it, this one is his mother's only child in the whole world, and this one is his mother's only child in the whole world. The Talmud, in tractate Shabbat, I just learned this recently, I'm in the middle of going through Shabbat, says that a person should never favor one child among the other children. And the lesson for that is from Joseph, right? That just because of a few extra pennies that Jacob spent on an extra garment for Joseph, it resulted in our ancestors descending to Egypt and the whole story of Passover, right? Of the whole story of the slavery in Egypt and the exodus from Egypt, etc. So it's important not to favor our children, but that doesn't mean that we have to treat them all equally. They have to be equally loved, right? But in order to love them equally, we have to love them as per who they are. We have to recognize that I love you because of who you, as you are, with all of your benefits and with all of your vices and struggles and challenges, etc. I love you because of all of that. Just as over time in our relationship with our spouse, we learn in the beginning we ignore their flaws, but over time we learn that that's part of what we love about them, right? It becomes part of them. It becomes part of what we love about them, and eventually this leads to an unconditional love. We're looking for the same thing with our children. From a Hasidic perspective, this comes directly from an appreciation of the soul that every single one of us has inside of us. In the second chapter of Tanya, the Alter Rebbe introduces us to the second soul, right? There's one soul is the animalistic soul. That's what drives us to be human beings and to be instinctive and to eat and to drink and to be successful in life, etc. And then we have the other soul. The other soul is the godly soul. And that godly soul, all it is a piece of God. I say all it is because it seems so simple. And yet, what that does is it makes every single human being intrinsically self-valued in the eyes of God. And as a result, this is a very strong message that Hashem sends us from the day we are born. There's this meme that goes around. I don't like memes because they don't have like a source. And especially when it comes to the Rebbe, they're like these feel-good memes that go around, like as if, so I don't usually pay that much credence to them. But this one, I've never seen these words from the Rebbe, but I believe that the Rebbe said, because the Rebbe often stressed this idea. There's this meme that goes around with the Rebbe's face, a picture of the Rebbe, and then on the side it has a quote, and it says, your birthday is the day that God decided that the world cannot continue without you. It's a very powerful perspective. This was something the Rebbe stressed over and over again. This idea that our primary identity, the fact that God decided the world was operating as it is, but your soul was needed for the world to continue. That's the intrinsic self-value that we talk about when we talk about intrinsic worth from a Jewish perspective. Why? Because what does it mean that your soul came down into the world? It means that there's something in the grand mission of all the cosmos that couldn't have been accomplished without you being here in this world. And that's the purpose of your neshama. Take a look at text 13, which is the Rebbe stressing this idea. Zach, you ready to read for us, or we're still on Sarah duty? We want to hear your lovely voice. We're on page 116, text 13.
Okay. I received your letter in which you asked my advice with regard to certain educational problems, especially how to influence the children to get rid of undesirable habits, etc. Needless to say, these problems cannot be adequately discussed in a letter. Nevertheless, I would like to make one general point which can be universally applied in educational problems, a point which is emphasized in the teachings of Hasidus. I refer to the effort to make the children aware that they possess a soul which is part of God, and that they are always in the presence of God, as explained in chapters 2 and 41 of the Talmud. When this is done persistently, and on a level which is suitable to the age group and background of the children come to realize that they possess a great and holy quality which is directly linked with God, the creator and master of the world, and that it would therefore be quite unbecoming and unworthy of them to do anything which is not good. At the same time, they come to realize that they have the potential to overcome temptation or difficulty, and if they would only make a little effort on their part, they would receive considerable assistance from on high to live up to the Torah and mitzvot, which constitute the will and wisdom of God.
There are so many quotes that can really summarize the Torah's view on a sense of self-worth, on a sense of intrinsic worth, and not being dependent on one capability or one talent or another. But I want to choose the phrase, Bishvili nivra ha'olam. The Talmud tells us that every single human being, think about this, is so close to arrogance. And I know we haven't really talked about that. How much is too much self-esteem? And maybe that's a topic for another night. But the Talmud tells us that every single human being has to view himself as if he is the entire purpose of the creation of the world. Hashem created the world for me, because in this moment, I'm going to do something, and there's a mission that I have to fulfill in this world, and how I fulfill it is up to me. That's my life. That's my talents, my life journey. But Hashem's mission in this world is fulfilled through me. And there's a lot of places that the Rebbe stressed this a lot. But last week we spoke about how the Rebbe founded Tzivot Hashem, the army of God. And over the years following that, the Rebbe introduced the marching orders for Tzivot Hashem. And they essentially became what's known as the 12 Pesukim. Okay? These are 12 quotes that the Rebbe chose from throughout Tanakh, throughout the Talmud, the Mishnah, Hasidus, of course, Kabbalah. And they're 12 statements that anytime Jewish children, and by the way, I don't know of any other Jewish leader, pretty much throughout history, by the way, maybe Mordechai, who used to address children on a regular basis. The Rebbe would often have, if you've seen those videos where 770 is packed to the rafters with Hasidim, right, by Fabrengen or whatever it is, the Rebbe would often have that same room filled with children. All the schools would come, and the Rebbe would talk to children. This happened on a consistent basis, multiple times a year. And whenever they would gather, until today, whenever there's a birthday party, whenever there's a gathering on Shabbat afternoon, whatever it is, in Chabad families, this is one of the things we do. And if you send your children to a Chabad camp or Chabad school, they're doing this all the time. The Chabad school that my son goes to in Los Angeles, they do this every morning. In the summer camp here that we have in Chabad of Pasadena, Camp Gan Israel, little plug, if you haven't registered yet, you can register your children. The Rebbe would encourage them to start off by saying these 12 verses. Okay? And I'll put a link in the follow-up email to these 12 verses. But I want to talk about the last one. It's here on the screen. It's a quote from Tanya. Yismach Yisrael ba'osav. By the way, personally, whenever I do a bat mitzvah girl curriculum, like if I learn with a bat mitzvah girl, these are the things I do with them. I do these 12 verses because I think they're so powerful. Each one of them. The first one is Torah Tziva Lanu Moshe, the fact that every Jew should know that they have an equal inheritance, that is Judaism. Whether they choose to utilize, whether they don't, they're still Jewish. That sense of identity. The second one, of course, is Shema Yisrael, Shema Hashem Echad, right? The oneness of God, a sense of freedom, a sense of purpose. All of these different quotes. And this is the last one. It's the Rebbe's attitude, it's the Hasidic attitude to happiness. What is it? Yismach Yisrael ba'osav. The Jews should rejoice in their Maker. Every Jew should share in God's joy because God rejoices and is happy in his dwelling in this world. In other words, Shekol mi shahu mizar Yisrael. Any Jew that there is in this world has to recognize that he is part of God's mission to create a home for God in this world. And what happens then is, number one, of course, we feel capable to be able to go out and get it and dream for the sky. Well, I can do it. The whole world's created for me. I can make this home for God in this world. I can fulfill the mission for the whole purpose of creation, etc., etc., etc. But I think there's another element here. That other element is, what happens when something negative comes their way? A challenge comes their way, right? But they know that they have an intrinsic sense of self-worth. They are a soldier in God's army. They have a sense of self-worth. I have a neshama, right? Don't you think it's not a long stretch that child would say to themselves, if I'm so worthy, it would be wrong for me to do such and such. Nobody needs to tell them what the right and wrong thing to do is. They know what the right thing and the wrong thing to do is, but they become empowered by this sense of self-worth. And I think that it's so telling that the opening of this sentence, of this statement, is Yismach Yisrael. They should rejoice. They should be happy. Why? Because an intrinsic sense of self-worth like that, an intrinsic sense of purpose, of I'm alive for a reason, that leads to real, lasting, and true happiness. So I'll leave you with this exercise for the week. Take a moment to go through that exercise that we spoke about. Review your child's strengths and brainstorm with your spouse activities and responsibilities that will highlight these strengths so that your child has a sense of self-worth. I'm sorry, so that your child has a sense of competence, that they are capable, and of course, at every opportunity that we're given, make sure that they know their intrinsic sense of self-worth. With this, we will conclude today's lesson. Please turn your attention to the video screens for a summary of today's lesson.
Key points, Lesson 4. 1. We need to see to it that our children are emotionally stable and happy, and self-esteem is a big part of that. 2. Self-esteem is essential for psychological survival. Low self-esteem negatively impacts a person in many ways, including inhibiting his or her spiritual growth. 3. A particularly detrimental consequence of low self-esteem is that it puts a child at higher risk for engaging in bully behavior or for being a target of bully behavior. Building our children's self-esteem helps prevent their becoming bullies or being bullied. 4. Self-esteem is comprised of two primary elements, a feeling of personal competence and a feeling of intrinsic worth. We want our children to love and value themselves for what they can do and for who they are. 5. The most effective way to build children's self-esteem is to treat them as worthy and competent beings. We do so by entrusting them with positions of responsibility. 6. Our children feel competent when they see success in their endeavors. It is important to tailor our parenting to the uniqueness of each child and to guide each child to activities that call upon his or her signature strengths. 7. We nurture our children's feeling of intrinsic worth by loving them unconditionally and not differentiating in our love between one child and the next. This intrinsic worth is grounded in the understanding that every child is defined by the infinite value of his or her divine soul.
Thank you all for joining us for Lesson 4. This has been Competence and Confidence, and we look forward to next week's lesson, Lesson 5, which I know a lot of you have been waiting for, where we're going to talk about feedback and consequences, right? Do we punish our children? Do we give consequences to our children? Where is the Jewish perspective on all this? Thank you all for joining us. Please hang around. I'm going to answer some questions.